Josh and Frankie. What a couple of dumb shits.
Hello, primates! You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations! You know, there are other places to find us in this world of ours, Frankie. We are at Primus Tracks on Instagram and Threads. PrimusTracksPod@gmail.com is the email address. And I already mentioned his name. He runs a Facebook page called, appropriately, Primus Tracks. It has over 1,000 followers. He lives on the 39th floor of Primus Tracks Towers. He wields more than the spade. He wields the plow. He wields the shovel. He wields that big iron bar that you use to break up really dry soil. He wields a lot of things, but mostly he wields an astonishing intellect of all things Primus and Les Claypool. Frankie Bearstein.
Hi, Josh.
Welcome back, Frankie.
I heard the cat in the background.
Oh, you can hear the cat? Damn that cat.
That's great. That's wonderful.
She's on the other side of the door, for crying out loud. Get the hell out of here! Today we are talking about Wield the Spade, track 10 from Oysterhead's The Grand Pecking Order. Before we get into that one, Frankie, I have one piece of miscellaneous debris, and it's actually a personal connection to the previous tune that we discussed, Birthday Boys. How this slipped my mind, I've no idea. Frankie, you've heard tell of my bothering my pal Dave in the dormitory hallway by running up and down the hallway screaming, "Are you still..." Of course. That refrain of Gina knows, in that same dormitory, in that same time frame, was my pal Jeevan. He was from Bahrain, and he wanted to go into the movie industry. He was studying film. And I replaced, of course, Gina with Jeevan. So if I would walk by his room, I would sing, "Jeevan knows!" And the last I heard from Jeevan, he was working in Bollywood and doing very well for himself. So congratulations, Jeevan. If you ever hear this, I still remember doing that stupid stuff to you. All right, Wield the Spade, track 10, The Grand Pecking Order. This one is the longest track on the record by time. It is 5 minutes and 48 seconds. Music by Oysterhead, lyrics by Stewart Copeland and McDonald. I forgot to do my research on that. I can't recall who McDonald is. Maybe, Frankie, you can fill us in on that, as well as the tune's history.
Wield the Spade was not part of the New Orleans set. They worked on it much later, and it appeared for the first time on the actual record. It was performed at some stops of the 2001 tour, and it was performed at the 2 reunion shows in Colorado. It has never been performed at any festival. It's interesting, right? I mean, they could perform the full album at every show, but have you noticed that when it comes to the festival dates, they prioritize some tracks over others? And I would understand Birthday Boys, not being kind of a festival song because of, in terms of the energy. But why do you think Wield the Spade has been reserved exclusively for headlining shows?
I would say its low-key nature is what keeps it off of festival dates, because they probably want to keep things moving for a festival gig and keep them more upbeat. This one, much more down low, energy-wise, and more artsy, music-wise, and lyrically. So it may not go over as well with a festival crowd as opposed to the Oysterhead crowd, which will pretty much take anything those three throw at them, from my understanding. By the way,
yes.
Patrick McDonald is the other party credited for the lyrics here on Wield the Spade. He is a guitarist and singer, and he was in a band called Timbuk 3. That's a great name. Good for him.
How do you think he got involved in the record?
Oh, I'm sure he is a writing partner for and with Stewart Copeland throughout the years on and off. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case.
Stewart has done a ton of soundtrack work, right?
Yeah, and he's probably collaborated with a whole lot of people in across those worlds. When you find somebody you work well with, you keep working with them. Oh, he's also McDonald. Also, by the way, has worked a lot with Eric McFadden, and that's a name some of us might know. He's a good guitar player. Cool, Patrick McDonald. I don't think I ever looked him up before. I'm gonna look up Timbuk 3 because I just like the band name. It makes me laugh. It's one of those band names where you laugh the first time, and then after that you go, "Oh, that's clever," and that tells you it's a good band name.
Like Butthole Surfers.
That one too. Although I guess that one still makes me laugh. Which I don't know what that says about my maturity level, Frankie, but here we are. So this one, absent from festivals, performed at most, if not all, other headlining gigs. The music,
Yes.
I guess we could start with the music, Frankie, does have that air of these guys who are trying to escape the trap of their technical skill. And what I mean by that is they just want to groove. They're finding something that they like and they're riding it out, but they're also trying something new and different. So this is something, if you were to listen to the music itself, isolated from the vocal tracks, it's very different for a Primus fan such as myself who went into the Oysterhead record. Very different. The groove and the lack of any whiz-bang musicianship is almost jarring, I think, to the casual Primus fan. But they're just finding sounds and things they like, and they're really making it more spacey and kind of pushing their own boundaries. And I do appreciate it for that effort.
It is fascinating because it is really laid back, as you pointed out, but it has a stop-start quality that makes it interesting to listen to because it keeps surprising you. I mean, when you think you've gotten accustomed to a particular beat it's going to follow, then it breaks away from that. There is a stop-start quality that I think is very enjoyable. It's also got, that I don't know how to describe it. Is it some kind of frequency, some kind of noise that is present in other songs of the record? Do you know what I mean?
Are you referring to that Doppler effect that
yeah,
Trey
exactly.
uses a couple times?
That it's always looming in the background throughout some of the tracks. It's also present here, and it makes the song kind of eerie, right?
It does. It is eerie, almost ethereal. And then when the vocals come in, especially our favorite, Stewart Copeland, BARBER, it just adds another layer of strangeness to it. And what I do appreciate is all three members of the band, are vocalists on this track, providing different flavors. Trey is doing some goofball nonsense thing. Stu's doing his BARBER, that low register voice. Les is doing his Les voice. At some point, his voice cracks, and it sounds like he's going through the Sandman mic too, but his voice cracks on, I can't remember what word, but it's very funny that he left that in there. So once again, more and more layers to this strange track.
That is precisely what drew me into the track at first. After some repeated listenings, and paying a little bit more attention to this song in particular, I found myself mumbling Trey's part over and over. I would say that Trey's backing vocal is one of the ultimate earworms of this record for me. And for a long time, I thought that Trey was just mumbling some kind of ad-lib or nonsense, as you said, until I read a theory by another listener who pointed out that Trey might be saying Babylonian impaling. What do you think?
So I thought it was unintelligible for a long time, but I have heard the word Babylonian in there. And I don't know if that's the power of suggestion, but I feel like I independently heard that as well. I couldn't make out much of the rest of the phrase. And so after a while, I just gave it the credit of being unintelligible phonetic sounds. So I'm not entirely sure what it is. But I wouldn't be surprised if Trey or Stewart Copeland took some specific phrase and broke it into its phonemes and made it sound more like some kind of chant that's unintelligible or doesn't actually have much semantic meaning. That wouldn't surprise me one bit. It's a clever thing to do.
And it's incredibly catchy, which is really surprising.
And what is he saying? Have you mastered the Trey line in the intro there?
I mean, as you said, it might be suggestion, but once I read that theory, it just kind of made sense, and that's all I hear now. Babylonian impaling.
Well, given some of the other lyrical content, there may be something there to that. Let's hear this, and let's see if anybody else has some ears on it. There's that Doppler effect, a little more buried. I do kind of like this intro for what it is. Yeah, I think now that you said something, I think that's what it is. Unless he's saying Babylonian Pele, like there's a legendary soccer player from Babylon. No, I think I hear it now, and that could once again be the power of suggestion, but he phrases it in such a way that it sounds like nonsense. So we've got that intro and Trey's refrain there. There's some interesting stuff happening throughout, and it does have that start-stop quality. Frankie, you also pointed out about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into this bad boy, there's something going on. Let's find out. They will pay for crimes they cannot count. Those little bass sounds. Before the firing squad and some behind the plow. The funny part. It might be around there too that his voice cracks where he says, "As you shave our nation's face, keep a steady hand." It cracks in there somewhere.
Listen to this, Josh. Revolt against the Persians. The Babylonian revolt was defeated by Darius Bau-Carrier on 27 November 521 before Christ.
Wow.
Shortly after being captured, Nebuchadnezzar IV was killed on Darius' orders. Conflicting accounts describe his execution as either being crucified or impaled. The Babylonian nobles who had supported the revolt, according to Persian sources, were killed alongside him. So this could be the historical event which Trey is alluding to, and it might be a parallel to the other historical event that is described through the main character in the song. What do you think?
Well, Nebuchadnezzar is a familiar name to me. And so this is something I would have read about years ago. So you're dredging up some academic memories, and I thank you for that. That is, I would not be surprised if that is the historical basis for that phrase. And what we should mention is that Stewart Copeland's dad was in the CIA, and he also was one of the founders of the Office of Strategic Services. So this guy was heavy into the intelligence community, and so he would have a really good sense, especially because he was stationed in the Middle East for a long time, he would have a really good sense of history and culture and all those elements that go into being a good intelligence officer. And so he would have been steeped in this stuff, and he probably would have shared some of that with his kids. And so Stu probably picked up on that as a kid. And because his dad was, more or less helping fight the Cold War, in his intelligence role, he would have a really good grasp. Obviously, his dad would, but also Stu probably would have a pretty good grasp on the socio-political climate of the Middle East, where he spent much of his childhood. And then pairing it with that historical event, that's really interesting, Frankie. I think you're onto something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to provide you with some background about who this song is about, but I was thinking that it could be an interesting parallel, right?
Oh, yeah, I think so, especially when you give us the background on the other individual from whom this tune is written, from their perspective, I should say. We might be able to connect some dots.
So musically, it's not one of the heaviest songs on the record. As you mentioned, it's actually quite ethereal, but it does have a certain density to it, right? It's a heavy track, not in the musical sense, but in the sense that it has a lot of layers musically, and the lyrics are also quite compelling. So it's an interesting combination, right?
It is. I do remember it capturing my interest upon first listen and subsequent listens. Over the years, of course, as I somewhat forgot about this record, what sticks with me upon hearing the track again for the first time in quite some time, of course, is Stu's vocal delivery. I had forgotten about the Babylonian thing. So there were a couple facets that I remembered pretty well, but just remembering the groove that they established and that stop-start, I think it all goes well together for what it is, yeah.
And the drums. It's also worth pointing out how Stewart is doing all kinds of things with his drum kit, but most of the time it's pretty understated, right?
Yep.
It's kind of in the background, and sometimes it's at the forefront. Sometimes the drums become, the main character in the song, or they grab the spotlight, but then they fade back, right, into the background, which I think is also something pretty interesting about the song.
He's playing with toys, then he gets on the kit, then he stops, then he goes back to playing with toys. Yeah, he's and I can just see him in my mind's eye jumping up from the kit and running over to the toys and playing those, and then stopping and giving one of those theatrical freezes and looking at lesson tray, waiting for his cue, and then running back over to the kit right on time because he's Stewart Copeland. I can just see him having some childlike joy doing that kind of thing. Let's listen to near the end of this track.
Yes.
You indicated that we should. This is 4 minutes and 50 seconds, one of Frankie's favorite parts. Back to the kid. You could just zone out on this, couldn't you? So as we were recording this, I'm a very physically tired individual because of just returning from a workout. And about 20 seconds into that, Frankie, I was ready just to sink into my chair and let that play for an hour while I dozed off.
Yeah.
It's kind of relaxing in its own way.
So let's go a little bit into the background.
Please.
The song was inspired by Romanian dictator
Nicolae Ceausescu
and his final speech on the 21st of December, 1989, a pivotal moment in the Romanian Revolution of the same year. A group of paid supporters had been gathered at the front with
Nicolae Ceausescu,
not realizing the vast majority of the attendants, those behind the front rows, did not support him. A chant quickly began spreading from the back, interrupting his speech, which he tried to continue while raising his right hand in a futile attempt to dissolve the growing distraction. People began to exit, with Nicolae shouting over the public address system for them to remain seated. He tried to win the crowd over by offering to raise workers' salaries and student scholarships, but it was too late. a revolution had started right before his eyes. During his dictatorship, he had made some very poor choices that had a very negative impact on agriculture and other lines of business. The weakness of his regime had been exposed at broad daylight for the first time. Well, Nikolai and his wife Elena were captured and shot by a firing squad. The lyrics of this song were brilliantly captured in a poster by the same artist who created the iconic album cover, the American artist Tim Slowinski. You might recall that poster. Political figure is being attended by a barber who is some kind of humanoid birth, and you can see some interesting reference to pop culture throughout the barber shop and the street. I think Gumby is somewhere in there. Do you recall that poster?
I do. That was the tour poster.
I think it's really great when the artists actually take the time to listen to the album, or, to get some knowledge about the band, and then they show that in the work. A recent example would be the poster that is going to accompany Adverse Yaw. It has all kinds of references, right, to the songs from across the albums. And Slowinski did something similar with that posters, which I think is really fantastic. From my perspective, this song is a masterpiece. For me, it's a work of poetry set to a droning, mesmerizing musical background, executed with perfect skill. As I mentioned, it was premiered on October 23rd, 2001 in Vancouver, played a total of 11 times during the fall 2001 tour, plus the 2 lone performances in Colorado. It was pretty easy to spot when the song was about to be performed, because Stewart would walk over to the microphone, he would narrate the opening line, and then he would go back to the drum kit. A variation of that would be that Stewart would narrate the opening standing up behind the drum kit, but there was always an element of theatricality to the performance, because in the live settings, Stewart does not narrate the lyrics as per the record. The words are the same, but the tone and the inflection is very different. So he kind of emphasizes different words during the introduction. And of course, Les sets the mood with his upright bass. So that's a bit of the background on the song. I find it quite remarkable, Josh, that they would take that kind of event and then they would manage to make a pretty catchy number out of it.
Certainly not the subject matter that you would expect. And of course, that's the from left field nature of this record, especially being exposed to Stewart Copeland for the first time in any appreciable way that I was upon hearing Oysterhead for the first time. But knowing his background, it totally tracks that this would be a topic of interest to him. This guy named
Nicolae Ceausescu,
who was the head of the Romanian Communist Party for 20-odd years under the Soviet bloc. And that rebellion you talked about goes right into the some of the lyrical content, because as the president of the Socialist Republic of Romania, of course, he was closely tied to the Soviet Union. And over time, he had to implement a lot of austerity measures as their economy tanked over time. He actually had to enact all kinds of pay cuts, food limitations, and energy limitations, so people would have spotty electricity and access to food. People were really upset with him. And so that idea that sacrifices must be made is a refrain in the tune. I can hear him saying that because we have to sacrifice in order to, for the greater good, whatever it may be, as he's giving these speeches. But at the same time, we have this grand allegory of the barber, of this political figure getting a nice shave and then unfortunately meeting an untimely end due to political intrigue, I suppose, or due to being expendable by the leadership. We've exploited the barber, now we can kill him. We don't need him anymore. Whatever that may be. I'm probably oversimplifying, but that's the message that comes to me there.
No, I think it's right. I think it's a pretty recurrent theme, right? When this kind of high-profile political figures, or just any high-profile figure, they have kind of like a right-hand person they trust until they don't anymore, right? Until they think they know too much or they have seen too much.
Yeah, and we know from throughout history, but especially during those Cold War era governments in the Soviet bloc and so on, and their allies, there was a lot of people who disappeared, I guess you could say, due to some kind of treason or betrayal, whether legitimate or manufactured. So that kind of thing happened quite a bit. So that also tracks, yeah. I do love the structure of these lyrics, especially in which Stewart Copeland makes this metaphor of, as you shave our nation's face, keep a steady hand. You're making us look better. The barber is, right? The working class, as you shave our nation's face and make us look good, keep a steady hand. And then listen to these words that will ring across the land. And those words must come straight from the speech of
Nicolae Ceausescu,
who says, wield the spade, ready the blade, sacrifices must be made. Nice work, Barber, except I can see the look in your eye, and it's time for you to be dispatched. So it's kind of tragic in that way. The unassuming Barber, does he actually have a glint of death in his eye? We don't know, because it's all from the perspective of the person in the chair, who clearly is not trusting or knows that someone's expendable. So I do also love the line, Frankie, it's a shame to lose a damn good barber, but that's life. What are you going to do?
I guess.
What are you going to do? The one thing I want to experience, and I never have, and if you have experienced this, please let us know how it went for you. I would love a close shave with a straight razor, to be in the chair and get sudsed up with the Barbasol or the cream or whatever it is, and then get that straight razor shave. Friends of mine who have experienced it said it is divine. You ever had one of those, Frankie?
I don't believe so. I have seen vintage barber shops throughout the city, but I've never felt compelled to actually get one of those services myself.
One of these days I'll do it, except I like my beard, so maybe not yet. Couple other associations I make with this tune and its lyrics, Frankie. One is because of Stu's background, and his father's background for sure, and because they were privy to American foreign policy and helping enforce it, albeit in, I should say his dad. So Stewart's dad was privy to American foreign policy endeavors and was helping in a clandestine way, of course. If you want a nicely distilled Cold War era look at American foreign policy, there's a great book called The Ugly American. Great for further reading on that topic. It's accessible and gives you a nice snapshot of that era. The other thing that comes to mind, and this is really specific, Frankie, but that lyric, be careful not to miss a whisker. Soon I face my people who adore me.
That's hilarious.
Yes. First of all, that's a great couplet. My people who adore me. We know that's ironic, given what happens.
And the whisker.
And the whiskers, yeah, given what happens to good old
Nicolae Ceausescu.
That imagery makes me think of, and some of these lyrics make me think of, a very short story by the author Dennis Johnson called Steady Hands at Seattle General. And it's all about a guy who's drying out in rehab, and another inpatient there is shaving his face and trimming his facial hair. And the guy in the chair says, "Don't get tricky with my mustache." And that is imagery has just stayed with me forever. That story, Steady Hands at Seattle Generals, from the Dennis Johnson book, Jesus is a Son, which is phenomenal. And I recommend everybody go out and get that. Speaking of Dennis Johnson, he had a National Book Award winner called Tree of Smoke about Vietnam-era psyops. And so I always make that association, as glancing as it may be, to Stu's background and what his dad did as a CIA agent. So there's a couple of things that this tune reminds me of, and they're all, despite the content of the tune, they're all pleasant. Really good stories and novels, and getting a nice shave.
I think this particular line is really great. They will pay for crimes that God and I will not allow. It gives you a lot of background on the perspective of the main character. He's basically pairing himself with God as an authority, right? So
Right.
there's nobody else above that. So he does think that imposing, his will is something similar to the role of a deity, right?
Mm-hmm. And pair that with the previous couplet, those ungrateful who've been swayed by intellectuals in their ivory towers. That's not to say the socialist communist movement was anti-intellectual, but what it did do was try to discredit opposing viewpoints, and usually by talking about the intellectual class, especially the intellectual class who stood by. They didn't necessarily agree with collectivism and communism, but they stood by and allowed it to happen in places like Russia, and just said, well, this is not good. This is why this is fundamentally fundamentally flawed. But they didn't actually do anything to try to stop it. And because a socialist system replaces God, in air quotes, with the state, more or less, I'm thinking that that's the comparison here. God and I is actually the state and I cannot allow. Some before the firing squad and some behind the plow. So some people are going to have to work. We're just going to put them to work as punishment for their crimes. And my other political enemies they're going to sleep with the fishes.
And the line, I'm troubled by the face I see before me, when the song is just beginning, it could be like any random person that walks into a barber shop concerned about the way they look, no? Thinking that they need to improve their image. But when you take into consideration all the background of the song and who the lead character is, it goes to show that I'm troubled by the face I see before me goes way beyond his personal image. He's already worried about a possible revolt, right?
Yeah.
So he can see the consternation in his face every time he looks in the mirror.
Yeah, and I have to be ready to face my people who love me. Also the people I'm going to kill. So that duplicitous nature, but also just the imagery. Yeah, you can go really deep on this track, and I do, especially the lyrics, and I very much appreciate that. Because there are still plenty of people who lived through it, who are alive and can tell you about it, but it just seems to have fallen by the wayside with the fall of global communism for the most part, right around the time of the death of
Nicolae Ceausescu
in 1989.
And I think another interesting duality in the song is that the lead character keeps referring to people, right? My people who adore me. He's the nation's face. His words will ring across the land. Mm-hmm. It's a person quite concerned, right, with the adoration and the approval of the masses. But at the same time, it's a shame to lose a damn good barber is such a revealing line, because you could replace it with, it's a shame to lose a damn good driver, chef, shoe shiner, whatever comes to your mind. And it paints this picture of a man that is always going to be alone, right? No matter how much adoration he believes he receives from the crowds, he's completely alone because he cannot trust anyone.
Once one gains power, Frankie, that's when paranoia can set in, because the other people around them also have power and it needs to be preserved. And so there are ways to preserve one's power. And as we see quite blatantly in this tune, one way is to remove those threats to your power by ending their lives.
He's got to worry about Barber cutting his throat, just like he's got to worry about somebody poisoning his food, right?
Exactly. The barber is holding a straight razor and can easily slit this guy's throat. And so the man in the chair is going to strike first.
You think Slowinski was trying to convey something by incorporating Gumby into the poster? Or do you think it's just just a random pop culture reference to Americana?
Was Gumby a symbol of socialist propaganda?
He was-
I'm
he
going to
was
have
a
to look
witness.
into this because I don't know. What the hell is he doing there? How about some Primates takes, Frankie?
Let's go.
Once again, the wonderful theme song you're hearing right now is that of Johnny Perona, an all-star Prime matron over at patreon.com/Primus Tracks. The universal constant over there is we post a thread asking for your thoughts on the track up for discussion. You put something thoughtful there, we'll read it on the podcast. Our pal Eric in Australia says Spade has the sinister darkness of Shadow of a Man with a story of power and paranoia. Makes me think of a guy like Stalin with the soul of a crocodile. We were on similar wavelengths there. Brooks Delight says, that poor barber didn't even see it coming. Neither did I. Nice, Brooks.
What a great review.
Our pal Anthony Del Preet said, I'll never forget that the bass riff mixed with Trey's vocal stylings from Wield the Spade was the loop for the first Oysterhead website. I remember that, Anthony. I remember going to the website and hearing that loop. It was about a 15-20 second loop. And I thought, wow, this is weird. This album's going to be weird. And I was kind of right. Jesse Colton says, Frankie, I don't know what prompted my teenage brain to do it, but I remember putting Wield the Spade on a mixtape for a friend, under the assumption that it was the best song to introduce Oysterhead as a band. Well, you got 13 choices, and I don't know if I'd put that at the top.
Very complex choice to begin with.
Yeah, depends on your listener. Now, Jesse poses a question, and I think you and I should answer it here first and then throw it out to all the primates. And you can send us your opinions on Instagram at primustrackspod@gmail.com, wherever you want to send your opinions to us. Which Oysterhead song would you demo for a friend if you wanted to win them over to our cult of Branch Claypudlians? That's a funny Branch Davidian reference, thank you, Jesse. So, which Oysterhead track would you use, Frankie, to win someone over?
Mr. Oysterhead, all the way.
To see their reactions, I would probably go with something like Armies on Ecstasy, because that one's a little out there. I do want to see what the reaction would be. Tell us yours. Maybe you successfully converted someone to Oysterheadism. Edwin Allen Richards IV, Frankie, said, when I was in high school, my dad would drive me to school in the morning, and I subjected him to all sorts of weird music. He was a saint for putting up with it all. For some reason, I remember him liking Wield the Spade the most out of my eclectic array of musical nonsense. I have no idea why that song stuck out for him, but it's officially father approved. Thank you, primates, for all your wonderful input on that one. Great takes, Frankie. Uh-oh.
Fantastic.
Okay. Live time.
Let's go.
Listeners, you'll never guess where these tracks are from and what date they are. That's right. You are correct. February 14th and 15th, 2020 in Colorado. Frankie, you had hinted at what to expect from a live cut given the differences and kind of the logistics of this track in a live setting. So we're going to hear the intro from Stew Daddy and go from there.
Barber,
yes.
Mr. Clean. I'm troubled by the face I see before me. As you shave our nation's face, keep a steady hand. Listen to these words that soon will ring across the land. Wield the Spade!
Ready the blade. Oh, I love the presentation on that. Stu is very much getting into role there, sounding like a political dictator who really wants to rally his people.
So theatrical, so dramatic. I love it.
Very much so. Frankie, your next time code says drums. Oh, yeah. So they're giving themselves a lot of space there, and Stu's having a great time with that space, given what Les
I think
is
that's
playing.
a pretty great representation of what the drumming is like on this track. It never stands still. It never follows a flat line, right? You think you know what the groove is going to be like, and then Stewart does something completely left field.
Let's forward to Trey, a little over halfway through this almost 11-minute track. Type 1. Tension and release.
Did you catch that? He was doing the lyrics with the guitar.
Yes, he was.
The guitar was singing
great.
the lyrics.
Type 1 jamming. He was doing he does that on a couple other tracks that we sampled live as well. I think that's really cool that he does that. It keeps it in that realm. And finally, on February 14th, Frankie wants us to hear Les laugh.
Hi there, Trey. What the hell brings you here?
Spill the beans? Spilling your beans?
Spilling the beans.
Spilling your
I'm a
beans.
wiki-ears.
Thanks for that, Frankie. Out of context, less laughter is pretty entertaining. And so the next night, they played Wield the Spade again. Now, they considerably shortened it this night, Frankie. Night 1 checks in at 10 minutes, 48 seconds. This one, about 7.5 minutes.
But they're completely different. Worth pointing out.
So get your hands on both nights from Colorado 2020, folks. Let's hear... Call down.
Barber hit the still clean. I'm troubled by the face I see before me. Be careful not to miss a whisker. Soon I face my people who adore me. As you save a nation's face, keep a steady hand. Listen to these words that soon will ring across the land. Yield the Spade.
I like that.
Ready to play. Yield the Spade. Ready to play. Sacrifices my baby.
I like that delivery at the end. Forwarding to about 4.5 minutes, where Frankie simply labels this portion awesome.
Yield the Spade. Ready to play. Sacrifices must be made.
That's a nice release there. And some chill soloing. Like it. He's giving us a little bit of the lyrical guitar again. And finally, buckle your safety belts. We're getting into the jam vehicle. Pop quiz, Frankie. Type 1 or Type 2 jamming? What was that? That was definitely some nice Type 1 jamming.
Yeah, it was within the confines of the song's structure and general atmosphere, right?
Yeah, you can have a Type 1 jam vehicle, absolutely. It takes a different kind of fuel than your Type 2, so you have to be careful where you fill up. However, it is just as effective, just as efficient, and just as entertaining. There you go, guys. Wield the Spade. And they wielded it in spades. I apologize for that. Wield the Spade, sheath it, because you've been tracked. And you know what?
Nicolae Ceausescu.
I don't want to hear anything else from you. Next time, Frankie, gasoline, Vaseline, benzene, amphetamine, take your pick.
Get your butter toast ready, Josh.
Primates, thank you so much for listening. At Primus Tracks, Instagram and Threads, Primus Tracks page on Facebook, PrimusTracksPod@gmail.com. So many places to get involved, to have some fun, to talk to your pal Frankie. Barber, later days.
Willie Mays.